Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're all doing well this morning. We're right at 10 o'clock. I guess we're 1 minute after now, but I'm going to give it another second to see if more people continue to join us. I want to give everybody an opportunity to be here. We're keeping everyone muted, but if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop those in the question box, and we will go over that together in just a moment. Just still giving it another minute here to see if anybody else joins. Good morning, Jessica and Shonda. Okay, I don't see anybody else joining, so I think we're probably all here. Again, hello everyone, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope all of you are well. I hope you're finding ways to take deep breaths and take care of yourselves in these really tumultuous times. I appreciate that you've taken time out of your schedules to be here this morning. We should get through this webinar in a little under an hour, but I'm really excited for our topic. We're going to be talking about sexual assault response teams. This webinar is for victim service professionals who want to explore the ins and the outs of developing a community sexual assault response team. So we'll discuss promising practices and available resources that will help guide SARTs through the challenges of development and just getting started, and then some challenges that SARTs commonly face beyond that as well. Before we officially get started, let's make sure the audio and everything is working well for everyone. I want to make sure you can hear me well right now. So if you'll look to the right of your screen, there should be a chat box there, or a question box is how it might be labeled. Could everyone just please test that chat box out for me? I've already seen a couple of hellos there. Thank you for that. Everyone else, if you haven't already typed a comment in there, go ahead and just let me know that you can hear me. You can drop your agency name if you want, where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see that. And then if you're having any audio or visual issues, please do let me know, and we'll try to address those things before we really jump in here. Our wonderful training coordinator, Kendra, is on the line with us, so she should be able to help us with any issues we're having before we really get started. You should also be able to see my PowerPoint on your screen at this time. So if you do not see that, please let us know. Open up the chat box here and see who's tuning in. Let's see. I always have an issue with this thing. Here we go. Now I can see everybody's comments. Hi, Kathy, Danielle from Henderson, Tennessee. Rap, woohoo! We love rap here at the Coalition. And Michelle from Safe House, welcome. Oh, Shonda, thank you for sharing that. You can hear me, but don't see my PowerPoint. Okay, let me make sure I actually have my screen shared. All right, there we go. I clicked the screen sharing button. Thank you for pointing that out. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. If somebody just wants to drop a comment there, let me know that you can see it. That would be helpful. Okay, you see it now. Perfect. Great, thank you, everyone. All right, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Megan Batista. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a program specialist here at the Tennessee Coalition. I've been here for over 3 years, going on 4 years now, and I love to get to say that because I love the coalition. I get to work on the coalition's Rural Sexual Assault Project. This is a project funded by the Office on Violence Against Women, and the focus of the project is to enhance and improve services for male and LGBTQ+ survivors. Just go on to the next slide there. Sorry about that. We do that work by covering 26 counties in rural Tennessee, and we partner with sexual violence service providers across the state. We currently have 3 partners, 1 in each major region of the state, and they do amazing direct services work with LGBTQ+ and male survivors. They participate on sexual assault response teams in their regions. They do coordinated community response work. They provide community education and training to other service providers in their communities. And I have the pleasure of getting to oversee all of this amazing project work, and I support them and give them the training and the resources and the tools that they need. So that is a bit about what I do here. And it is through the Rural Sexual Assault Project and through the funding by OVW that I'm able to bring you this webinar today. All right, let's go over our learning objectives quickly. So first, we're going to define what is a SART and what are the essential components that make up a sexual assault response team. Then we'll review the key steps to SART development. We'll explore best practices and recommendations all throughout. We're going to problem solve some common issues that SARTs face. And then finally, I want to leave you with some resources so that you can continue to learn more on this topic. There is a lot of information around what it takes to develop and then to maintain a sexual assault response team. So think of this morning as simply your diving off point. There will be more you'll want to learn, absolutely, and I hope the resources I share at the end will help you get there. All right, so let's define a SART. Of course, we will spend the rest of this presentation continuing to answer this question. We are not answering it in full right here, but let's establish now what the basic definition of a SART is. A sexual assault response team is a multidisciplinary group of representatives working together to change and improve sexual assault response in a community. SARTs are focused on collaboration and systems change, and they strive to improve outcomes for survivors. And there's no one single definition to a SART, though they all basically say the same thing. It's also important for me to note here that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to SARTs, and nor should there be, because successful SARTs are ones that are meeting the needs of their own community. So just like no community is the same in their needs and their resources and their funding options, so too no successful SART is going to look the same either. So what I'm sharing with you here today are the general guidelines and recommended best practices. But you may already be participating in a SART that has found a lot of success operating in a way that I may not suggest here. And that does not mean that you're doing things the wrong way at all. The important thing is whether or not your SART's methods are resulting in the desired outcome, which is always improved safety and well-being of survivors. That's our top priority. So take what I've shared today back to your other SART team members, take it back to your community, measure it all against what has worked in the past, consider the uniqueness of your own community, and then go forward from there. Now let's pull out some important words from this SART definition we've covered and make sure we're all on the same page about those as well. So these are key terms which you will hear me repeat often throughout the remainder of this webinar. It is important that we are all on the same page about what I mean when I am using these terms, not only for the purposes of this training, but more importantly, for the purposes of your teams. These are all terms that are going to be really important for you to define within your team. Make sure everybody is in agreement about what these terms mean right from the start. That shared language is so important. So first, let's define systems change. Remember from the definition we just covered, we know that SARTs are focused on systems change. So what does that mean? It is an approach to social change that affects structural and institutional systems. Systems change at its core answers the question, how can change be affected? And systems change is about improving individual responses to sexual violence while also increasing collaboration between systems. So it's not just big picture, it does also address the short-term immediate needs while also working towards long-term sustainable impacts for the system as a whole. Now let's define collaboration. We also know that SARTs are collaborative efforts, but I think it's not unusual for folks to have slightly different ideas about what collaboration means. So here's what we mean when we say collaboration in the context of SARTs. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center, they define collaboration as partnership between agencies and individuals committed to working together and contributing resources to obtain a common goal. And I have heard collaboration described by the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They describe it in such a helpful way. They say that collaboration is more than coordination, which is, coordination is about organizing parts so that they can work together. And collaboration is much more than just cooperation, which is really just complying because we have to. So we don't want to get collaboration confused with these other terms. Collaboration is about committed partnership, and that is what it takes for SARTs to work together to achieve common goals effectively. And then finally, I want to define community. This is a term that each individual SART will need to fully define for itself. But when we refer to community here, we are talking about the specific geographic service area that your team decided upon based on a number of factors. So each SART decides the service area that they will be operating within, and that can be along city lines, county lines, it could be within a single town. A service area could cover several counties or just a single college campus. And we'll talk more later about making that decision on your SART's jurisdiction. What's important right now is that we know that when we're saying community, we're talking about the SART's geographic service area. All right, so what is the purpose of a SART? Though SARTs can vary in many ways from one to the next, all SARTs have three main goals, and those are to support victims, to hold offenders accountable, and to increase community safety. And the overarching purpose of any SART is to improve collaboration and communication among all of these sexual assault responders. SARTs are not the only way we can work towards these goals, but they can be very effective tools to impact major long-term change for victims and for communities as a whole. The first step in SART development is to form a planning team. And the planning team begins when one or more persons or agencies who respond to sexual violence are interested in leading interagency planning and response to sexual violence. The planning team needs to be made up of any agency and person who is already bought into the idea of a SART and is willing to commit their time and expertise and resources to lead the SART. And the planning team can begin in many different ways and by any stakeholder within the system. These are a few great examples from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center that show how the planning team develops organically most of the time when one stakeholder initiates a collaborative response with another. So a few examples of that. Say a director of a rape crisis center forms a planning group to determine ways to provide more comprehensive services to victims, whether or not they report their crimes. Or a decision maker from law enforcement who wants to improve criminal investigations. Maybe they contact a rape recovery center to coordinate immediate advocacy support following a report. Or a campus health service official contacts several community-based organizations to develop a coordinated response. So I won't read every single one of these, but again, these examples show how the planning for a SART can begin, and often does begin this way just organically, when one of those first key stakeholders initiates collaboration with another. And then once that formation starts, it's their mission to assemble the sexual assault response team. So actually forming the whole team, who else should be at the table? There are generally 5 core agencies that should be invited to the table as equal participating core partners in the SART. And I have these 5 core agencies listed a few slides back, but here they are again. So the core partners, or key players as we might call them, are always advocates. And those would be sexual assault advocates. They could also be dual domestic violence and sexual assault advocates, medical providers, SANEs, law enforcement, prosecutors, and corrections. But there are other stakeholders or responders who can be on the team as well, and often should be. Think places like colleges or other agencies that are common points of sexual assault disclosure, such as faith communities. They can be valuable partners in a SART. And then it's always important to think about any community or culturally specific groups to invite to the table. You know, when we're thinking about improving victim response and outcomes for victims, it is essential that we are considering who are the survivors that are most likely to fall through the cracks. Who are the ones least likely to seek out help when they're harmed, or the ones most likely to be victimized. These are the underserved populations that are more often failed by the system due to structural issues or accessibility issues or historical harm. So we want to make sure that these underserved groups have someone within our teams who is representing them and who understands their specific challenges within the system and can be a voice within the team for them. That's really important. Then establishing SART leadership. So a great SART leader or coordinator is going to be someone who understands the system as a whole. So someone who has understanding for each multidisciplinary role, as well as how those roles should interact with one another and work together. Many SARTs will fund their coordinator through a grant in order to have someone whose time is 100% dedicated to the SART. And that's, of course, ideal if you are able to do that. Having a funded and a designated SART coordinator can really be key to a SART's longevity and its ability to maintain momentum. However, some SARTs have good success with a leadership team instead of a single SART coordinator. That is absolutely also a good possibility. I think in those situations, it is just more important than ever that each member of the leadership team has very clearly defined responsibilities, and they are each respecting and remaining accountable to their own role, as well as every other role on the leadership team. They've all really got to work well together. And if they can, then a leadership team can absolutely be a successful approach, as opposed to that single coordinator. Now let's talk more about SART jurisdiction. Remember, this is your team's defined community or geographic service area. One of the things that will influence your jurisdiction is obviously the service area of each individual team member. However, your service area will also influence who gets to be on the team. So the first questions to ask are, who are we trying to serve? One, and then what changes are we trying to affect? So whatever it was that prompted that initial team formation, that's likely going to answer these questions for you. And then defining the jurisdiction and deciding who should be on the team will just come naturally from that. So if you're trying to affect state level change, then of course you'll need representatives who provide services and have jurisdictional power from all across the state. Then the next major consideration will be any changes in laws and policies across jurisdictional lines. One obvious and an important example of this is that legal definitions for sex offenses can vary from one jurisdiction to the next. So that's one really important consideration here. According to the Office for Victims of Crimes, they have a SART toolkit. According to that, a SART jurisdiction may be a local community, a state, a territory, tribal land, campus, military installation, a national park, or a multi-city or multi-county region or area. So lots of different options there. It just depends on what you are trying to accomplish. All right, so now let's talk about assessing readiness. Is your community ready for a sexual assault response team? Is this the right time to start one? Some items you'll want to consider when answering this question. What is the perception of sexual violence in the community? Are there any educational programs that take place around sexual violence? You know, how are sexual assaults reported in the news? Are they reported in the news at all? And, you know, there are some communities, in my experience, this is more often seen in very small rural areas, but there are some communities that simply will not talk about sexual violence. The attitude can be that, you know, sexual violence just doesn't happen here, so we don't need to talk about it, and we certainly don't need services to address it. If this is where a community is at, then there's going to be some work that has to be done before a formal SART can survive. So other questions to consider, you know, what are the current victim services available and how well known are those services? What are the community resources that are available? Does the community have capacity to support a SART? And if not, what would it take to build that capacity? You know, what foundational work do we need to put in place first? Sometimes building a support and funding for sexual assault services has to be done first before we can try to put a SART in place. And the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault has a great readiness assessment template that I will link to at the end of these slides. And I think it's a really useful tool if you are at this stage of trying to determine if it's even the right time to begin. And then there are, of course, budgetary considerations. Generally speaking, the costs of a sexual assault response team are going to be absorbed by all the participating agencies. So each participating agency should be paying for salary time of each member that participates on the team. And then agencies will also be contributing things like physical space for meetings, equipment for printing, you know, equipment for presentations, all of those things. However, there are grants, there are funding options that could cover some of these costs as well. I'm going to link to a toolkit also at the end that provides much more in-depth information about how to access those grants and fundings too. And then the last consideration is data collection. So data collection should happen as you are assessing readiness, but it doesn't stop there. Data collection will be an ongoing practice throughout the entire lifetime of a SART. But you need data at the onset for a few very important reasons. First, you need to know how prevalent sexual violence is within your community. How often is it occurring, or how often is it being reported? And then you need to identify if any trends in the data are occurring. You know, are there particular demographics who are victimized at higher rates? Are there certain groups who are particularly vulnerable and need to see some focused interventions? And then if you can collect data on the front end from a period of time prior, you can see what, if any, changes have occurred over time. You know, maybe some interventions have been put into place or certain approaches have been put into place in the past. So looking at that data will help you know what has worked and what hasn't. And that's going to be key to putting your strategic plan into place, which we are going to cover next. So creating a strategic plan includes three main components. 1, where we've been, 2, where we're going, and 3, how we plan to get there. The essential components to a SART strategic plan are a vision, a mission statement, a set of guiding principles, and a set of goals and objectives. So first, the vision. This is going to be very brief, just one sentence that tells us what your SART is. For example, and I'm just making this up, we could say the vision of the Metro Nashville Sexual Assault Response Team is to improve the collaborative response of sexual assault service providers in the Metro Nashville area. And then we broaden and expound upon that vision with the mission statement, which is going to offer more details and answer more questions about what we're doing here and why we are doing it, and also how we're going to do it. This example on the right side of this slide is published by the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. They have a whole list of sample mission statements that you can view on their website. I think this one in particular is such a great example. It's really thorough, it's specific and memorable, but it's also not overly lengthy. So this mission statement says that the Tri-County SANE/SART program in Ohio is a collaborative effort between Erie, Huron, and Ottawa County victim assistance programs, prosecutors' offices, law enforcement, and hospitals. The primary mission of the Tri-County SANE/SART program is to meet the needs of sexual assault victims by providing quick, compassionate, culturally sensitive, and comprehensive forensic evaluation and treatment by trained professional nurse experts within the perimeters of Ohio state law and the same standards of the International Association of Forensic Nurses. So I think it's a really, really good example of what a mission statement could look like. And this mission statement is going to act as the anchor to your work and the work of your team throughout its lifetime. So when team members leave and new members join, which is inevitable, or progress and focus is momentarily derailed for any reason, the mission statement is going to act as the anchor, that thing that the team can look to recenter and get back on track. And because the mission statement shouldn't really change over time, we want to keep it as broad as possible while still including the essential components. So again, I think this example from Ohio accomplishes just that. All right, then the next component is your team's set of guiding principles. These are your agreed upon, victim-centered, and trauma-informed principles. And a victim-centered approach requires a SART to establish agreed upon principles at the foundation of their work. Principles such as victims are not to blame, victims deserve autonomy to make decisions for themselves, and they are the best experts on their situation. Principles like responders should always start by believing survivors. And we have a commitment to understanding that trauma affects all people differently. So that means that victims will display different reactions and emotions, and that doesn't imply guilt. A commitment to understanding that all responders are impacted by bias is really important. And we have to be committed to being able to and being willing to address those biases in our response. These are the kind of assumptions or commitments that should guide a SART's work. And whatever guiding principles your team chooses, it's just important that each team member holds those values true and everyone is in agreement on them. And what's also important here is that you have ongoing education available for team members related to these values and how to really implement these values within their work. Then your strategic plan will also need to include a set of goals and objectives. And these are two different things, both of which we want included. So what's the difference between the two? Goals are your big picture framework for the outcomes you are working towards. Objectives are the detailed and quantifiable steps you're going to take to achieve your goals. So goals are abstract, they generally don't have a specified time limit, while objectives are specific and they do include a specified time frame. When we're developing goals, we'll want to look back at our written mission and vision as well as any priority areas that we established from the needs assessment phase, right? When we're collecting data, we're looking at priority areas that we need to focus on. So those are the things that are going to inform your big picture goals. Like, what's your big picture purpose? For example, if part of your team mission is to improve outcomes for sexual assault victims, then a goal to that end could be to lead an education initiative on trauma-informed practices and care for victim service professionals. That would be the goal. Then an objective based on that goal could be to provide 12 trainings specifically on the topic and provide that training to 120 victim service professionals within the designated SART jurisdiction within a 1-year period of times, right? So it gets much more detailed, has time limits, is quantifiable. That's going to be what an objective looks like. Okay, the next important step in SART development is setting communication standards for members. And setting communication standards is important for many reasons, all of which basically fall under these 3 umbrellas of confidentiality, ethics, and shared language. And what makes setting communication standards so important is that SARTs are made up of, obviously, multidisciplinary team members, each of which are going to have varying standards of confidentiality and ethics and language. So communication standards are about effectively communicating with one another and having shared common definitions. But they're also about understanding that victim service disciplines are held to different codes around sharing client information. For example, victim advocate privilege. There are victim advocate confidentiality statutes, and oftentimes other disciplines can be unaware that that's a real thing that advocates are bound to. So those are some vital considerations for teams to really flesh out together early on, set those communication standards, those shared language standards ahead of time. Now let's talk about developing protocols or guidelines. These are living documents, so they can evolve over time, and they lay out the details of a multidisciplinary coordinated response. I especially love the definition from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, which says that SART protocols are agreements between agencies about the provision of sexual assault services and the roles and responsibilities of core responders. And when we're developing protocol, we want to keep our guiding principles at the heart. So I want to jump back a bit to the guiding principles we talked about a couple slides back, because those guiding principles are what are going to inform a survivor-centered, a survivor-led protocol, which is so important. Protocol that is about believing and trusting survivors, keeping survivors informed and empowered with information, addressing unique needs and understanding that every survivor in every case is going to have its own set of nuances and complexities. They all look different. So we want protocols that say that as responders, we agree assault is never a victim's fault, and our priority is victim safety and healing. And then some more nuts and bolts information on developing protocols or guidelines. Protocols should define each team member's role, and most importantly, the intersections of the team members' roles. So each team member's defined SART role is really just a reflection of their professional role within their own agency. But here it will be detailed within the lens of collaboration with all other members of the SART and for the SART's collective big picture purpose. Like we touched on in the definition of a protocol, it establishes the agreement between all responders on expectations for the processes and procedures within the system. So processes such as the transport and storage of evidence, processes for interagency referrals, making sure that every service and option is ready and available to a victim when they disclose to any stakeholder. The protocol should clearly lay out the process for response, no matter the victim's point of entry or who they disclose to first. So things like the time frame for performing exams, those things should be included. where exams will be performed, any medical follow-up steps following an exam, those should be included in protocol. Chain of custody for completed kits, how the kits will be stored, and then considerations for victims who choose not to report to law enforcement, but may want advocacy services or medical attention. Our process for handling those situations, it needs to be within our protocol. Things like, what are the mandatory reporting laws for responders in cases of child abuse or in cases of vulnerable adults? Those are really necessary components. And then, will your community require specific sexual assault response training for law enforcement personnel or for prosecutors? You know, how do prosecutors decide whether or not to prosecute sexual assault cases? Protocol should also include a list of key terms and definitions. Remember the importance of shared language like we talked about earlier. And, you know, relevant legal definitions for sex offenses and mandatory reporting laws. Those are essential components as well. And then from your protocols, most teams will want to develop MOUs, so memorandums of understanding, which are also sometimes called letters of commitment. These can be used to formalize the partnerships between agencies. The essential components in an MOU are, one, some history or context for what's going on and what it is that has led to the partnership. Two, what our purpose is here. Three, the roles and responsibilities for agencies. So this will have already been laid out in your protocol, and you may also want to include responsibilities for specific staff positions within agencies. And then 4, MOUs should also include the resources and the commitments that each agency is bringing to the team. So physical resources like meeting space, as well as commitments to participate in regularly scheduled meetings, those things should be laid out. So everyone's expectations are the same. And then of course, the signatures of all decision makers. So a great MOU can hold all parties accountable. That's really the expectation, you know, that through the MOU, we set expectations for everyone involved. And I'm also going to link to some resources at the end that include some good sample MOUs, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel with these. All right, let's talk about some common issues that SARTs can face. And I think most SARTs do face these challenges, as well as others, at some point in their lifetime. But that doesn't mean that those challenges can't be overcome. And we're going to also talk about some proven ways that we can mitigate these challenges. So member recruitment, getting people on board. We want people on the team who are bought in, right? Not people who are reluctantly showing up because they feel forced to out of obligation or for whatever reason, but we want members who are there and actively participating because they believe in the mission. So how do we tackle this issue? My first recommendation here would be, 1, to use your network, draw on your connections. Those folks in the community who you already have a good established relationship with, they know other responders who you don't know yet who need to be on your team. You're going to have much better luck getting those folks on board if you have a mutual contact to connect you. So draw on your network. And then 2, use positive marketing strategies when you're recruiting members. And this one, I have to confess, is a challenge for me personally because I have a tendency to focus on the negative. I'm just more apt to point out all the things that are going terribly wrong, to say like, here's where we're failing victims, and that is why we need to step up. We can do better than this. And, you know, naming and bringing to light those gaps in services and those areas that need improvement, that's necessary. And we'll get to that. But that is not always an effective marketing tool, you know, when you're first starting out, especially because in this case, pointing out those gaps in services can come across as pointing fingers and putting blame on the folks who we are trying to recruit on our team, right? So we don't want to do that. So some positive ways to generate buy-in would be to focus on all the good that we're going to do for the community. Focus on your written vision and your mission. You know, here are the great things we're going to do for the community, and XYZ agencies are already on board. And then other agencies are like, oh, hey, I want to show the community that I'm invested in this cause too. I think I should be involved in that as well. So that can be a really great way to generate buy-in. Another common issue is a loss of momentum. It's not uncommon for SARTs to sort of slowly fizzle out sometimes, or see certain members just show up less and less frequently until before we know it, meetings just aren't happening and no one is really collaborating with one another in any effective capacity. And I think in these cases, we have to first ask what went wrong and when. So maybe there has been staff turnover in participating agencies. That's a common cause. And that just means we need to revisit our MOUs and revisit everyone's roles and responsibilities, because information just gets lost in staff transitions. Maybe the focus and purpose of the SART has gotten derailed in recent meetings, and we simply need to revisit the purpose, bring everyone back to the big picture. Perhaps we didn't do enough work in the early stages to establish what the community's unique needs are. And so the SART has been operating in a way that is a good template and works great for other communities, but not the one it's actually supposed to be serving. So these are all good questions to ask to help teams, recenter and pick up steam again. Then internal conflict can be a common challenge among SARTs. There can be power struggles. Sometimes there are deep histories of sort of bad blood between agencies. That can just happen. There can be some relationships that need repairing. And we have to remember, this is stressful work. This field, victim services work, it's certainly rewarding, and we're passionate about it. That's why we do it. And it's important work, but it can be high stress, and we all experience varying degrees of vicarious trauma, which is really impactful. So we have to remember that and just give each other grace. And then because SARTs bring together service professionals from all across the field, our different perspectives, first of all, our perspectives are just going to be very different, and our approaches and our purpose within the system, they all serve different roles, and that can sometimes feel in opposition to one another. The thing to remember here and to constantly remind your team of is that we all have the same ultimate goals, right? Bring it back to your team vision and mission and goals. Revisit those things frequently to remind everyone that, yes, we're going to have differences. That's perfectly natural and okay, and sometimes good, but we are a team and our ultimate goals are the same. And then my other tip here would be to establish group rules. Establishing shared group rules specifically for your meeting times can make a world of difference as well when we're trying to mitigate conflict. Your team gets to collectively decide what the group rules are, and these could be things like, what is shared here stays here, which in some cases within a SART is going to be absolutely mandatory. But other rules could be, we're going to respect each other's time. We're never going to speak for longer than 5 minutes, or you get to set what these rules are. And the rules are going to vary depending on the structure of your meetings and maybe what's on the agenda for that particular meeting. But the idea is that you've established these on the front end. So everyone goes in with the same expectations. You've given your team a sense of ownership over the meeting environment. And then the other thing is that these rules can help keep everyone accountable. So it's good to write these out, keep them posted for everyone to see. And then if someone from the group starts to stray from an established group rule, then you can point to the shared rules as an accountability reminder that everyone needs to follow these. And then we already covered generating buy-in. The last common challenge I want to touch on is under evaluation. When SARTs are not sufficiently evaluating their work, tracking changes across data or tracking outcomes, then team members can start to feel like we're doing this work simply for the sake of doing the work and simply to stay busy. Under evaluating our work makes us feel uncertain, like we wonder if what we're doing is even worthwhile or making an impact, because we don't know, where we're not measuring our progress. And then we inevitably start to lose our steam. So continuously tracking data and having regularly scheduled meetings that are dedicated to evaluation is really essential. That's not only for team morale, but of course it's essential for the team's success too, right? We can't know if what we're doing is working or if we need to make changes if we're not critically looking at our outcomes and analyzing the successes and challenges of our past work. So that's important. Okay, so we've talked about challenges. Now, what makes a successful SART? In addition to meeting the most basic definition of a SART, which we've covered, to improve response to victims and improve outcomes for victims, there are a number of other key components in a successful SART. One is active participation from all members. And this isn't very easy to achieve, but there are some things you can do to encourage active participation from everyone. And the first thing would be to, back to what we discussed a moment ago about MOUs, laying out everyone's roles and responsibilities and expectations on the front end and having those designed and agreed upon by all parties. So there is a sense of ownership and individual commitment right from the get-go. And then 2, creating multiple ways or avenues in which members can participate, because not everyone is going to feel comfortable speaking up and engaging within meetings. That can be a very personal thing. So offer other ways for members to communicate. Can you, as a SART leader, can you make yourself available to talk with members one-on-one maybe? Allow everyone the opportunity to share input in smaller settings or over email. It may also be really unrealistic to expect some members to be able to physically be in person for all meetings. We know that's true right now in this environment where so much is going virtual. And then in rural communities, especially where the SART jurisdiction may run across multiple counties, some members are not going to be able to travel to meet in person, every time a meeting is scheduled. So allowing members to phone in or Skype in, those are really simple accessibility offerings that can make a big difference in participation. And this leads us into our next key component to a successful SART, which is regularly scheduled and structured meetings. So keep flexibility about how folks can communicate, but stick to a consistent schedule that's agreed upon by everyone in the beginning. And then establish clear structures to your meetings. So structured meetings have an agenda that everyone has been given ahead of time so that we all come prepared and with the right expectations about what the purpose is for the meeting and what our role is within the meeting. And this is a really important piece. I know it sounds so simple, like, yes, of course, meetings have agendas, but the agenda is key to keeping team members on track during a meeting. Giving members time to prepare, to come into the meeting already knowing what they need to share with the group, because a week ago they received the agenda, so they've had time to prep and think about what they need to come prepared for. The agenda also sends a good message to everyone that their time is valuable and is respected, and that we're committed to our progress, we're committed to achieving our desired outcomes. So that's what a really structured meeting can do for everyone. And then in successful SARTs, all members value collaboration. We already talked about this at the beginning, so I won't belabor the point here, but just remember that collaboration, it's more than coordination, right? It's more than just cooperating with one another. It's about committed partnership, which is what SARTs by definition are all about. And then the next key component is that members have respect for each other's unique roles. And that means that everyone understands each other's role within the system. It's important that each member can have opportunities to share with the group what it means to be in their shoes. You know, what are their particular capabilities and limitations within the system? And likewise, what is each member's knowledge base? What's their expertise? So, you know, carve out intentional time for the team to get to learn from each member individually. And finally, improved outcomes for survivors is always a SART's ultimate goal. But there is no one-size-fits-all approach to achieving improved outcomes. Communities should be allowed to decide what works best for them individually. And just like the needs vary from one community to the next, so too the needs of survivors are never the same either. So an improved outcome for one survivor, for example, may be prosecution and conviction. But an improved outcome for another survivor may simply be to be heard and believed by someone. I think the most important key to success is a community-led approach to the sexual assault response team and a survivor-led approach through the system. It's about what works for the survivor ultimately, right? And when thinking about measuring success, we have to remember prosecution rarely occurs. Conviction even more rarely occurs in sexual assault cases. We all know this. Though we hope for these outcomes, of course, the most important and also the most achievable outcome is healing for survivors. At the end of the day, we want survivors to walk away after they've sought help, you know, feeling like they had a team of professionals who were fighting for them, who were rallying around them, who believed their story, who wanted to work hard to see them whole. You know, a group of professionals who supported the survivors' choices, supported their autonomy, and fought to break down barriers inhibiting their personal power. These are the outcomes that really set a survivor on a road to therapeutic recovery. So these are the outcomes that should always be a sexual assault response team's priority. Okay, so resources. Before we leave this webinar, I want to say, like I said earlier, there is so much more to developing SARTs and continuing SART work than what we could fit into this time here. And there's so much more beyond my own knowledge too. So I want to direct you to some great resources here that will help you learn more. I've referenced these some throughout this webinar, but the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Office on Victims of Crime, and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. These all have SART toolkits that go into really great detail and offer good case examples. They offer templates for, like I said, the readiness assessments, templates for policies and MOUs. They have ideas and resources around data storage and tracking options, which is a really essential component. And things like that can be helpful to you no matter where you are in your SART process. You can also read about different SARTs from all around the US to get your own ideas and see some real life examples of what has or hasn't worked for other SARTs. So I really encourage you, check out all of these resources. We can send you these links so that you don't have to try to write these down right now. We can send them to you all in an email following this. And that's all I have for you today. So we'll sign off here. Here are my references. And then here's my contact information. I want to give you that as well. Please reach out to me by email or by phone if you have any questions or want to discuss any of these ideas we talked about here today. I would love to speak with you more. And let me say a big thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do for your communities and for survivors. Please remember to take care of yourselves and vote. That's the last thing I'll say. Go vote if you haven't already. Everybody go vote. All right, I think that's all we've got. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much again.